Welcome back, everybody, to another exciting episode of Aaron's Opinion, the podcast for blind people where we speak about critical issues in the blindness community and all other issues from across the universe and galaxy. We're joined by somebody who claims that this episode will be a train wreck, who claims that if he's not lost his marbles already, we'll see exactly how he's lost his marbles. So who on earth is this person? He has been somebody who's been very kind to us here at Aaron's Opinion, giving us advice about people and things like that. And he's been giving a lot of interesting advice. And he's just been a very interesting person around the blindness community. And we want to get to know him right now. So Brandon Hennis, welcome aboard.
Thank you.
Who is Brandon Hennis? And of course, I'm going to mute my microphone and sit back and listen to your life story. You have the microphone. So who's Brandon Hennis? Go.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, thank you for letting me be here. Aaron, especially you. Great to be a part of the program. Well, I was born December 7th of the year 1986. Doctors were very concerned at birth because in the first trimester of my mom's pregnancy, there was a near miscarriage. They gave her a medicine called brethine, whose generic name is tributaline, which has varying degrees of side effects, causing a lot of issues with underdevelopment. That includes such things as brain separation, the two hemispheres of the brain not connecting. Now, for anybody who's curious, I want you to take an orange, and if you have one, split it apart. Have nothing between it. Don't put any stem pieces or anything. Just separate the two halves of the orange. Now, let's pretend one half of the orange is sour and the other half isn't. That's my brain. One side works properly, the other side does not. This also means a lot of things like autism, ADHD, sensory processing issues, and let's not forget I was born totally blind. Since, of course, I do have limited light perception, which has actually been extremely, decreasing over the years. And the light perception was limited to begin with. To such a degree that if you really want me to see the light, your light better be about as bright as a halogen on a pickup truck. So that kind of gives you a little background into the kind of the birth of Brandon Hennis. Now let's take you a little bit deeper into the childhood of Brandon Hennis. How do we get to the childhood and talk about the challenges that were faced? My mother, her name is Tammy, was very, very difficult, had a very difficult time, really, at first, knowing what was going to happen. There was a lot of unpredictability. As a matter of fact, in an interview that was done with her when the last River Run flight was done for flights to and from Lincoln, Nebraska, when I was attending the School for the Blind, she even said that at birth, there were many questions that needed to be answered. How did I get where I was, and how was I going to get where I needed to go? But those were questions she was willing to answer very quickly. So throughout my childhood, she took courses through Hadley School for the Blind and other places for that matter on Braille, learning how to label things, learning how to make things accessible. One of the biggest challenges that we ran into during my childhood was that schools were very difficult. A lot of the public school districts back then had the mentality, they had the shape of, well, we don't have the funding to provide the necessary means for him to attend our school because we really just can't provide the funding. We don't have the people, we don't have the equipment, we don't have the money. And this was an ongoing battle for years because I personally wanted to be a part of the public school system, but that did not occur. My dad, shall I point out, by the way, a little backstory here because my dad factors into this, but not in a good way. He left us when I was 2 years old. Now, I want to go backwards. I forgot to mention one piece that's very important here. In 1987, a newspaper article was done. My grandmother actually brought this paper over here just this past couple of weeks, right, or about a month or so ago prior to the podcast that we're doing tonight. So if you note, today is this is April of 2025. So anybody listening late, you'll understand when I say a couple of months. So around February, she brought over a newspaper article, and it had a point about that they had actually diagnosed me with SIDS. And the doctors flat out didn't think I was going to make it because of the heart murmurs and other. Like I said, I was basically born underdeveloped. If you want a very simple word for me, complex medical case. And I want you to think about that throughout in case we go deeper into certain things. And of course, if Aaron has any questions, he'll chime back in the producer's chair, and he'll give you some the questions he wants to know, and you'll get Aaron's opinion. Of course, the title of this podcast as so named for its title. Now, we want to let's dive back into that schooling subject that I went to earlier, because clearly the question that many people are going to ask is, well, how did you get at least your first 10 years of school going? Well, we're going to go year by year and how it occurred. And this is not this is kind of lengthy, but to some extent not. Now, I say that because unlike other podcasts you may have listened to that may have short details, this one kind of has a lot of backstory. In kindergarten, it took a lot of fighting, but we were able to get me into a public school, but it was not easy. There were advocacy groups involved. There were attorneys involved. There was the NFB. I think my mom had mentioned that at one point she had gotten the National Federation of the Blind involved at that time, and they were very instrumental in making sure to say, look, he can do as much as a person who is blind as anybody who is fully sighted. And in some cases, I don't want to say better than, because that's the wording some of them use, but I don't like to use that term better than. I like to say in a modified way, because since I don't see, for those who are fully sighted, you're going to appreciate this. Since I don't see with my eyes, I see other ways. That's my policy, is I still see, just not the way you do. I look at life as a challenge, as a crossword puzzle. Every day we get up, we don't know what we're going to do that day. Each piece is scattered on the table, and it's for us to put together. That's the way it was in the schooling districts. First grade year, ended up at a public school, the same public school that I ended up at kindergarten. Preschool was very difficult. In fact, we ended up doing a lot, kind of moving a lot over the years due to housing issues that were, cited. And my mom was a big safety person. If it didn't look safe, we didn't stay. Very important. As we go to my second grade year and third grade year, I spent those 2 years at Nebraska School for the Visually Handicapped, as it was called back in those days. Now it's the Nebraska Learning Center for the Education of People Who Are Blind or Visually Impaired, as I understand the name. That's a very long name. Somebody please tell me why it was so long. Anyway, they should have just kept, at least NSVI would have made more sense to me anyway. But, hey, I digress. Grade 4, I attended Benson West School in Omaha. Shout out to anybody that may be listening who is listening in there that maybe went with me, or even a few of my visually impaired counterparts. Friend of mine named Ronnie, who went to school with me during that year. So shout out to you. Fourth grade year, Benson West Elementary School, and that was easy. Fifth grade, Pinewood Elementary and Middle School in Omaha, Nebraska. Now, I point these out because you're going to see a pattern here emerge. Fifth grade, fifth grade, fifth grade, fifth grade. Now, I say that because there were years I was supposed to be going to sixth and seventh earlier than I did. However, as we moved due to circumstances outside of our control, well, some schools just didn't feel like I had the credit to go forward ahead, even though I was getting all A's in most of my classes, A honor roll several times. So, for example, my first fifth grade year was Pinewood Elementary. I wrapped up that year, 97, 98. Instead of going to sixth grade, however, they kept me back in 5th grade, and Minnesota State Academy for the Blind. Now, there is a school with a lot of good memories that I can share, too, along with Nebraska City. I've got good memories from both schools for the blind, especially competing in track and field multiple times. I met a couple of people I know very, very well who are very dear to my heart there at those locations. We fast forward another 5th grade year. Why? Because in 1999, after leaving Minnesota, actually at the end of 98 and into 99, we attempted to get me back into school. Well, they sent me back to Nebraska City. Why? Again, public schools were not willing to provide funding to allow me to go to the public schools. Things start to look up in that department for a little bit. In fact, for the remainder of my schooling. Why? Advocacy groups like Protection and Advocacy is in the state of Wyoming, and several of the governor's offices in various states that we were in. Yes, my mom was very, very big on go to the top. Would involve the governors, the senators. Hey, if they would advocate, she would add them, no matter what. And that's exactly what she did. So we end up with the 7th, 8th, 9th, and 10th grades all being, and those were the last years I did in school, due to serious abuse in the 9th or in the 10th grade at the hands of my dad. That's what ended my high school and unfortunately falls my chances of finishing a high school diploma. We're still working on resolving issues with services down here in the state of Iowa, so I can finish up high set. I can't believe I'm saying that at 38 years old. That's embarrassing. Anyway, going back to that, in the 8th grade, I was in Minnesota. Or not Minnesota. 8th grade was Wheatland, Wyoming. 7th grade was Guernsey, Wyoming. Two very awesome schools. They were okay with providing services. And actually, the state of Wyoming, the Montgomery Trust Fund, had bought my first license for JAWS for Windows. See, now we're getting into the meat of my computer knowledge, by the way, which did start before I ever got a copy of JAWS. I must credit Nebraska City School for the Blind computer instructor at the time, Richard Haywood, for his very, very well-taught skills on not only how to teach a person how to, learn the keyboard, but how to use JAWS and how to get around the environment for which you were in, which helped me out tremendously in my school years going into the middle school. And so 7th and 8th grade were definitely amazing. Now, 8th grade, I ended up in two different schools because we left Wyoming due to my mom having to divorce her then ex-husband, who was actually not very good to us kids. Sad to say, considering that he was in the military. I mean, regardless, I appreciate his service to our country, but I wished he was as good a stepfather as he was a warrant officer, and quite frankly, a very good warrant officer, who I think everybody would have credited. But all of that aside, after we left Guernsey, Wyoming, I went to Beverage Magnet School. Now, I know that's kind of an odd name for a school in Omaha, Nebraska. Met some wonderful people there, wonderful people. I wouldn't trade them for anything in the world. The same is true for Scottsbluff High School. Now, I was born in Scottsbluff, Nebraska, at Regional West Medical Center. And Dr. Stephen Bosch, who was my doctor, give him a lot of credit. And I know normally I don't like to mention a lot of names on podcasts, but he gets the props because every time another doctor said he's not going to make it, Dr. Bosch was listen, I'm not going to give up on him, and Brandon will survive. I love Dr. Bosch for that reason. So after Beverage Magnet, 9th grade was Scottsbluff High School. Great experience, minus a little bit of trouble with teachers' aides and getting some things funded. But we fought through it because I don't believe in giving up. I have one policy: either try or sit down. I could use other terminologies, but there may be little ears listening on the podcast. We're going to keep it 90 plus 10. At least I will, because I don't know how others feel, but I know how I feel, and I like to keep it real. 10th grade, Kearney High School. Again, wonderful people. Unfortunately, that year was cut short Because, again, abuse at the hands of my dad. Now, the story goes kind of similar like this. My dad had not played a role in my life for many years. And after the death of my grandpa Chuck in 2000, he had tried to enter his way into our lives, but as naturally, I didn't feel ready to talk to him yet because I was still hurt about the pain of being left at age 2 and not knowing why I didn't get birthday calls from him. The year 2002 comes up. 2002, I talked to him. He at the time was living in Glens Falls, New York, or correction, Merced, California. And then they moved out of Merced, and he was moving into Glens Falls, New York. Well, 2003, he moved to Kearney, Nebraska. In Kearney, Nebraska, he actually, unfortunately, began the abusive trail. That is to say, it started as every Cinderella story does, right? Oh yeah, it was perfect. You see, the perfect life, the dad always doing silly stuff with you. And you got to remember, I come up with silly words. Even my dad had joined in on the fun for a while till after him and his wife got comfortable. The stepmother, by the way, just happened to be the very person he cheated on my mom with. I know this sounds like we're airing Jerry Springer here. I'm sorry, folks, but to tell my life story means to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God. And at this point, we have proceeded to pass through that. Now, the abuse that took place was very significant. Physical, mental, medical, and otherwise. I will, for the sake of my own mental health and emotions, I'm going to kind of stay away from the specifics a little bit. If you guys want to know more about what happened, I do have a written text file, which I actually have a couple of written text files if anybody's interested. One, if you want to know a little bit more about the effects of breathing and my underdevelopment specifically, we have a text file. We did a lot of deep research to compile this and put it together so that we would be able to have all of that for you. I also have a story that I wrote, which details and documents a lot of what happened to my dad. So I won't, for the sake of the length of time and what have you, we'll kind of bypass the details about the abuse itself and talk about its after effects. My mom was an over-the-road truck driver. Now, I did get to spend some time on the truck with my mom, but then I ended up back at my dad's a second time, courtesy of a therapist. While receiving trauma therapy, his answer was, go back to your dad's. You didn't give him a fair chance, even though I went through abuse. Apparently, 1 year was not enough. Well, he wanted to go back. He wanted me to go back so he could date my mom. Well, see, my mom's a very, very knowledgeable person about laws and about practice, and, well, so knowledge that he isn't practicing, and he has no license. Bam, bam, boom. While I was in high school, the high school counselor at Kearney High called my mom and said, hey, we don't normally recommend that we pull your son out of school, but there is something serious going on. And he's not telling us. And when we try to call his dad, they're always on the internet. Now, I need to point out that back then, we're talking about dial-up modems, okay? This is 2003 we're talking about. Now, Aaron, if you're with us on the mic, you I don't know, you probably can think back to those days, right? Dial-up modems.
Of course.
You got to push the button, and the phone company gets mad at you because you run up the phone bill because apparently you dialed out. And
yeah, of course, I remember those days, right? Sure, we all. We all remember.
Those are the days.
The good old days.
Those were the days, my friend. Oh yeah, the good old days. Actually, I think
the good old days.
I think
where you would.
I think the Judge didn't have a song. Go ahead.
Right, I certainly remember. I've been certainly listening to you the whole time, and I got to tell you, Brandon. Fortunately and unfortunately, your story, as I knew it would be, your story is really, really fascinating. I mean, this is all. Of course, I believe you. This is all just one big successful train wreck, basically.
Oh, it is.
Completely. And I have.
But a victorious train wreck.
A victorious train wreck. Well, okay then. Well, that certainly works.
What I mean by that is that
Mhm.
even though I went through this, I have a
Right.
belief that, look, okay, I went through trauma. I'm still going through trauma as we
Sure.
speak today, with
Absolutely.
the onslaught of the online bullying that has been actually ongoing for 22 solid years. Yet, it just doesn't seem like you can, kind of like Alabama, Randy
Mhm.
Owens' line, you can't keep a good man down. So
Right.
clearly
Sure.
that's,
Sure, sure, sure.
you know,
And I certainly remember
I believe
those,
it.
and I certainly remember those internet days. So I'm about
Oh,
11 years younger than you. So I was born in 91. Um,
ooh.
but I still, how old did you think I was?
So when I heard you,
Yes.
funny you ask that. I figured you were close to my age. I figured either 80s or 90s. I figured I was somewhere close. I was going to guess
Right.
probably about 30. I was going to say about 35, maybe.
Yeah. So I'm 33. So pretty close. Right.
Hey, I
Exactly.
was close.
Yeah. So I
Hey,
was
you're
born in,
33, the same number of years as the number of cars in the Indianapolis 500. How do you like them apples?
well, that's pretty interesting. Never knew that.
Ooh,
Now I know. Um,
the rest of the story.
There you go. So, but the significance though to those, and I appreciate the fact that you want to keep this episode very serious, but also very clean, and I think that's what makes it meaningful. Um, so certainly I understood what you meant. And by the way, children are forbidden to listen to this. This is Aaron's opinion is explicit and marked for adults only. So children don't have access to this material. But
Children, do not tune into the.
right, exactly.
We're sorry, but the cassette player that just played that clip busted.
That
I.e.,
that
yes, I
was
can do
good.
things like that with my voice. I remember one time somebody asked me, they're like,
Hmm.
can you do the, when you power off the record, it's they flip the switch, but for some stupid reason that speaker's still on. And you just,
Right. Absolutely.
whoops.
Absolutely.
Sorry, the record's no
No
longer turning.
problem. No problem. So yeah. So one thing that's very specific is that in the 90s, when I was a little boy, and for those who are my age or younger or in their 20s, they won't really appreciate it. But if a school is contacting parents of the 1990s and they say, we're trying to get in touch, but you guys are on the internet all the time. That would have been very strange back then because the internet was very hard to use back then. You had to wait around. I
Well, it's
remember
still
when,
strange today. Why are
well,
you on the internet instead of focusing on your child? But yes, back then even it was
well,
very
yes,
strange.
but it was even more, it would have been even
Yep,
more of a red flag back then. And now it's like no big deal back in these days, So yeah. So
I feel
basically,
bad if somebody's using dial-up in 2025. But hey, I digress
they're
because there are probably
probably,
still people
I
who
wouldn't,
can't afford anything else.
in certain parts of the world, you never know. You never know, right?
Hmm.
So more than likely, yes, that
If
is a
you are,
thing.
shout out to you. And if you're listening to us on a dial-up connection, listen, I give you props. I am proud of you.
So the point behind all this is that back then it was very hard to get into the internet.
Yep.
So if you were on it, it meant that you were, should we say, well, let's let Brandon tell more of the story.
At that point, if at that point it means you were not aware, you were complicit, you were also not aware of what was happening. That is, they knew what they were doing, my dad and his wife, but they knew that in order to get away from it, the best way to get away from it is to blockade any access to phone calls. Because the first method they tried, telling the school how bad Brandon is, how bad he was at home. By the way, I remember getting called to the counselor's office. I heard this happened at home. Do you want to tell me what happened? First of all, home issues at school? Not me. I want to go to class and get an A, and I want to pass my tests, and I want to get somewhere so I can go to college and have a successful life. I mean, I'm not talking about getting rich. Okay, so for those of you thinking get rich quick schemes, get out of here. Well, I'm thinking more on the lines of, I want to be successful and do something with my life. I never imagined I'd be at 38 years old, still with no job experience as far as a paid job experience. And instead of me being on this podcast, talking about no job, I would have imagined myself, if I go back in time and rewind it and replay everything, if I could live that part of my life over, I'd find some way to have been out of my dad's way sooner so I could finish high school And who knows, get a job as a radio DJ and then hear Aaron going, this guy is a famous radio DJ from Iowa or Nebraska or wherever I wanted to be at that time. But nope, the cards you get dealt are the ones you get played. And my dad didn't want to answer his phone. And so my mom, who was, by the way, an over-the-road truck driver, as I stated earlier, she actually came off the road. Now, this is one of two times. The second story is actually even more, shall I say, blunt and honest than the first. And I must apologize for the terminology that I'm going to use here in a minute. But on the first one, not so bad. There were issues that were happening. I was not the only one affected by the abuse at the hands of my dad. My younger brother was, but I should spotlight the fact that he's fully sighted and that this application only just goes to show that we were both affected by my dad. My mom came off the road, came to the school, said, all right, I'm going to come off the road, guys. And she called the company and said, I have to take care of my son. I just found out he's been being abused by his father in Kearney. And so I'm in Kearney right now to go get him. So my truck's at the terminal and I'm going to have to take care of him. So this is February of 2004, by the way. Now, mind you, I had started going to my dad's in 2003. So you understand where this was, how long this started to materialize. So February of 2004, I'm actually in the process of, going through the motions of having just gotten out of my dad's. And so, flashbacks galore, the typical stuff. I'll save the mental health stuff for the story. Like I said, I have a story that will go into deeper detail, and you can understand the trauma from that. Anybody that wants that, please reach out to me. In fact, what I'll probably do is I'm going to give my email at the very end of this so that you can contact me, anybody that has questions directly for me, if you are interested. Plus, I do have a YouTube channel, and what I'll probably do is if Aaron is able, when he links up on the podcast to his YouTube, I'm going to have him send me the link, and then I'll cross-link it in my description. And then we'll chain that, and you guys can, if you have questions, ask then. Having lost my place in the queue here, let's see. My mom getting me from my dad's and me recuperating. Okay, that was a bit of a difficult task. So it ended up with 2 stays at Bryan West LGH Psychiatric Facility. Now, I will say they were very accommodating for people who are visually impaired the first time. The second time, I can't really be as positive about that experience because of the fact that they had a couple of newer nurses there that did not really understand what it meant to not have what no vision really meant. Now, psychiatric hospitals, they should know this, but they didn't. They were trying to make me more codependent than I wanted to be. Now, listen, I believe that you should be willing to ask questions and seek help when needed. However, I also believe that if you are capable of doing something, it is not okay to just let somebody do something for you if you are capable, because we already have the moniker in the able, and there's so much ableism already going on of, well, you need this done for you, don't forget, I'm going to have to help you with this. So we really have to kind of get away from that a little bit and start remembering that the skills we were taught, we've got to put into practice. And that's one of the things I've kind of gotten forward. And then I educated them, and it was a lot of it was they didn't know. And so I took time to educate them. And so really the second stay, which was supposed to be more of a secondary evaluation, turned into an education about people with visual impairments there. But hey, I'm okay with that, I guess, because it allowed me to teach people things. Well, so that was before the outpatient therapist who sent me back to my dad. So we're going to skip over 2004's second stay at my dad's in Augusta, Georgia, with the exception of how did I get back home? Oh boy, my mom was back over the road, and it just so happened my mom had just delivered a load to Miami, Florida. I'm on the phone with her. I've told her everything that's going on. By the way, I met my girlfriend Jessica actually by name. I should point out that we ran into each other by voice when I was a kid during a time my mom had to get a car repaired. I used to travel a lot when I was younger, all over the country. I got some stories about that, including the infamous armadillo incident in 2002 in Corsicana, Texas. But my mom, let me tell you something. And I mentioned Texas because my mom was born in San Antonio, Texas, which, for anybody's knowledge, for anybody's, rapport, means that essentially I've been told that makes me part Texan. I tend to agree with this. She is told, hey, you need to take another load to another state. Now, mind you, Qualcomm, which was a little utility they used for the truck drivers back then to notify of things, had a notice. There was a sheriff talking to your son. My mom called to talk to my dad. My mom eventually then got a call from the Columbia County Sheriff's Department. Now, Columbia County, for those who are curious, is in Augusta, Georgia. It covers Augusta, Grovetown, and there's a couple other communities within Columbia County. I'm not exactly up on my geography, but enough to be able to tell you that those two towns are in Columbia County. And they said, he's not telling us fully what's going on, but we know there's abuse going on here because we can see it in him, the hesitation. There's definitely something going on. Now, my mom being the eternal, why aren't you doing anything if you know something's going on? Why isn't? Because he's afraid to talk. Well, my mom told the dispatcher, I have to go get my son. The dispatcher says, no, you have to go take this load back. My mom said, no, I have to go get my son. I mean, this was going on and this was across the Qualcomm for quite a while. So finally, my mom called the dispatcher. And the dispatcher's like, we've got to be able to get this done. My mom says, if I have to, I will take the truck and I will turn it in and I will go get my son myself. You are not coming between me and my children. Well, okay. You're still taking the load. Mom said, oh, you want to bet? She dropped the load off. Goes and bobtails, which for those who are younger, maybe that are, your 20s, if you've never driven truck, bobtailing is when you take the trailer off the back of the truck and then you basically drive what they call the tractor, which is the main part of the truck that of a semi-truck or a big rig, and you are driving that without the trailer hooked to it. It's not something that's highly recommended because it is a high-profile vehicle, and if you hit a windy zone, those things can overturn real quick because they do not have the stability of your typical van, SUV, or even, for that matter, buses, although they're high-profile, but they at least have a tad more stability than taking a big rig and bobtailing. My mom hauled Patootie all the way down from where she was at to Omaha, Nebraska, takes in the truck, turns it in. Pardon the French, but these exact words popped over her mouth. I will be damned if you're going to come between me and my kid. Fuck this job. Turned around, got in her car. Now, mind you, she's gotten no sleep at this point. Okay, so I want you to picture this for just a second. She's already bobtailed from the East Coast back to Omaha with no sleep. All right? Then gets in her car, again, no sleep, drives all the way from Omaha to Grovetown, Georgia, where I was located at the time. Comes and picks me up. All right? Well, again, still with no sleep. It took 7 police officers to separate my mom and my dad's wife, who was trying to pick a fight with my mom, might I add, on the way as my mom was getting stuff packed in. So that was fun. Not. The only thing that was fun about it is I got out of there. But this is how afraid of my dad I was. Mom wanted to stop and get a hotel in Atlanta. But see, I was too afraid of my dad, so I was like, we're still in Georgia. He's going to find me. Mom says, I got to stop somewhere. So she said, you pick a town in Tennessee and we'll stop there. I said, all right, let's do Chattanooga. Okay. Found a hotel in Chattanooga. Stopped there. And, well, that's how I got out of my dad's. the second time. After all the abuse I went through, which, by the way, ended up causing a traumatic brain injury, there is a benign cyst on the base of the brain, shrinkage of the brain from what is called cerebral atrophy, which deals with the atrophy refers to the shrinkage, by the way, for those who are not entirely inclined on the medical front. Perhaps that terminology atrophy does tend to throw people a little bit. There's the difference between atrophy and dystrophy. Dystrophy refers to the weakening. Like muscular dystrophy is the muscles weaken over time and they become less usable. And from what I understand, there's a little bit more that goes on with that. But with cerebral atrophy, imagine somebody has started taking apart your model car, or they've done something to compress it and make it smaller. Or let's just press down on the top of that pop can. Anybody got a pop can? Just grab a hold of it, just squeeze the top and the bottom together, and it just gets a little smaller. And that's what my brain has done. Unfortunately, Mid-American Energy has not actually restored the size of my brain back to its original, and I apologize for the power company not doing so, but that's what I'm stuck with. The other side of this is, now that I have that, along with the already ongoing conditions that I've been, graced, shall we say, with, if you call it graced, some people call it cursed. I still call it a blessing because it teaches others to learn to appreciate people for their differences. I've had this constant thing, this nagging question every day. What if you could see? What if you could say? And I said, I don't really want to think about that because I love myself as I am. I don't care to be different. Visually, it would be cool to know what it looked like, to know what colors look like, to be able to understand color. But I don't really personally give two cahooties about, looking at the stars. Because they've been described to me so well that I feel like I've got a vivid imagery painted in my head. If you ask me to describe if you ask me to describe a microphone and I'm not holding it in my hand and it's one I've owned before, I've never owned, for example, a Shure MV microphone series, but I do have a Shure microphone in my mixer, in my microphone stand spot at the back of the house. I could describe it to you. Just a stick mic with a long cable at the end. And on the microphone, there's a little switch to control mute on off, and a top that has. And I've never known what those top grills are made out of. Maybe somebody better than I can describe the material. It's the little screen that they put on those mics that feels really rough. Which, by the way, don't ever hit it with your hand because it actually hurts. I've done it. When trying to diagnose why I'm hearing something in a microphone I shouldn't hear, like brr, brr. Yeah, don't ever listen to that in a microphone. When you tap the top of a mic, you should never hear brr. So, as a result, my mom's had to take care of my health issues, and I know I got way off topic, but hey, that's ADHD for you. Welcome to the world of the Brandon. I did get my ham radio license in the year 2005, hence the email kc0usm at Gmail, which I'll mention that later, but I'll just early prep. I became a ham radio operator in the year 2005, in the month of June. Yes, after even with the abuse of my dad's, and I know the question's coming. But Brandon, you have one side of your brain working. It shrunk. How the hell did you do that? Well, it's very simple. It's called I Don't Give Up, and it's called I Don't Care If, hello, Facebook, which is now dinging in my ear. It reached a point where I said, I'm either going to do one of two things. I'm either going to sit here and mope and say, poor, pitiful me, I can't do this, or I'm going to get off my butt and I'm going to do something about it. And I decided to get off my ass and do something about it. Went in, took my ham test, and bam, 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 and bam. 94%. Apparently, I was told I scored the highest number on a ham test that they had seen in quite some time there in Scottsbluff. So I got my ham radio license in Scottsbluff County, Nebraska. By the way, my girlfriend, Jessica, still still hangs it over my head, and it's funny that she got the higher score, and I'm like, that's great. I love it. We laugh about it all the time. She's like, I beat you in the scores. I said, I know, but I could still beat you in Mortal Kombat because I play video games a lot. So, and she's over here taunting me about Mortal Kombat as we speak. But that's basically kind of the where I got to that point. Now let's fast forward. I'm going to skip over a lot of things here because there's just a lot of immaterial. Unless you want to talk about the heart attack my mom suffered in 2006 after and by the way, while this was happening, I had me on a medicine called Seroquel, which I personally had to take myself off of because I was having a lot of problems with it. But in 2006, December 18th, I'll never forget this. I'm talking to a dear friend of mine who is now deceased. Many of you guys that actually are that may be listeners of Aaron's Opinion may have also been listeners to an old thing called the Blah Broadcast from Blahland, hosted by the late Sean Coughlin. And he passed away in 2001, for those who are perhaps not aware, maybe don't know where he is, from complications due to what was stage 4 kidney cancer of an unknown origin. And we were very close, very close. I met Sean in 06, or rather in 05, I should say, in December 31st, New Year's Eve. And this is how bad the Seroquel messed me up. I'll never forget this part. I laugh about it now, but I was embarrassed when it happened. So he says, I said, so Sean, where are you from? He says, I'm from Mass. Now, I asked him literally, I'm not making this up, Aaron. I said, where's Mass? He just sat there and his jaw had to have dropped. I'm pretty sure his jaw fell off his face and landed on the floor, and likely he had to pick it up and put it back on. Sorry, Jacob Marley, Ebenezer Scrooge reference if you've ever read The Christmas Carol. And he's going, what? And so, yeah, that was a thing. Before I continue, do you have any questions for me, Aaron? Because there's quite some more fun. There's quite some fun stuff coming here in this, and I want to. But if you have any questions on the first half of this, I want to make sure you get those through.
Well, absolutely. Everything you're saying is excellent. Your delivery is really, really good. As of course I knew it would be, certainly. And no, I do not have any specific questions for you. But of course, everything you're saying, I'm relating to it 100%. Yeah. And by the way, you know that I'm also a ham. Of course, KQ4FFR,
Oh, I've seen your call sign on QRZ, actually.
That's me.
I don't think we've ever. We have not spoken on the radio, though. We need to change that sometime.
Yeah, certainly.
I love that call sign, by the way. FFR? I love it. Free from rockets.
Oh, well, let's, well, you know what? If you say so, if that's what floats your boat, that's what floats your boat. I don't know.
Well, I'm not on the sea, so if anything's floating my boat, then I'm hiding. How do you like that?
You are quite a character, and I do not have any questions apart from the fact that you are delivering this whole fun story in a very meaningful way. And unfortunately,
I feel maybe a little too professional. Go ahead.
As I say, if you're too professional, that's too much your fault, I guess. I don't know. I can only blame.
I agree.
I can only blame the guest for that. But what I will say is that, yeah, I mean, fortunately, you have the right attitude about living, right? Unfortunately, we at Aaron's Opinion and the gentleman to whom you've just mentioned a few moments ago, no, I've never heard of that person. But remember, I'm very much younger. I'm a lot younger than you, and I didn't start podcasting until about 5 years ago. So that person,
wow,
never heard of, right?
Right.
I
know a lot of people in the. Go ahead.
How long did you think I have been podcasting, by the way?
Listen, with the way you go about it, you don't sound like somebody that's podcasted for 5 years. You actually sound like you've done this a long time. Like I really, you're very, very prepared. And I think I think, honestly, I would recommend this podcast to anybody who is very, very curious. I'll be honest. Aaron's opinion, um, I, I'll be honest. I'm not nervous about public speaking at all. And
I
I'm
can tell.
nervous when I go on an interview
Yeah.
because I get to tell a life story that I like for the first time in literally in my entire life, I'm publicizing a story entirely talking about my life. That's the first time I've ever done it. And I don't think I did too shabby a job, but then again, I don't like to comment on my own work. I let others be my critics. I'll criticize myself in privacy.
Well, here's what I can tell you. You're doing great, and we'll definitely connect offline. But you're definitely you're an amazing guest, and you're absolutely what our listeners from home have been wanting to hear. And unfortunately, your story, although it's your story, unfortunately, though, others also have shared these experiences too. So sadly, this is not the first time I've heard this type of story. I mean, yours is especially. Yours is especially crazy, but it's not the first time I've heard a crazy story.
It's not the first story, and trust me, I tell this to everybody. I feel bad for anybody that has to go through this because
it's important. It's important for you to tell your story, though, because people need to hear it. So you see,
you bet.
So that's why these stories are as important as they are. Yeah, absolutely. So then what happened? You can of course continue with this victorious train
wreck. Yes. So as I get my ham license in 2005, I mentioned my mom's heart attack in 06. Let's kind of go between that and introduce my first time I ever got to go on Skype. I'm going to keep others' names, and I mentioned Sean's because unfortunately for some, unfortunately for others who did get to meet him, Sean was actually one of my biggest inspirations to really keep going when I was starting to get bullied a lot in those days. So Sean was really an excellent mentor in terms of, even though his personality was quirky, and even though he had, and I say quirky, for some that didn't, utilize the terminology that he used, that I use, they probably thought we were the weirdest people ever, especially me after I got around him. But then I realized that what he was trying to do was set up a lesson. He said, hey, you can't give up on life just because everybody else thinks you're crazy nut and because they think that your batteries are running low. And in 2005, I got introduced to Skype, and I'd already been using Yahoo Messenger. Everybody remembers Yahoo. And everybody remembers Yahoo Messenger. And I say everybody because there's people, even I didn't realize this till recently, that are younger than us, Aaron, who actually have Yahoo.com email addresses. Yahoo.
That's bizarre. That's bizarre.
It is. Absolutely. And I'm surprised, but more power to them. I mean, I have a Gmail address. I mean, I used to have my old Yahoo email address, and I kind of wish I still had it, but at the same time, I'm glad I don't because, well, to be fair, I tend to find Gmail is a little more easier to set up. Let's just be honest. But hey, if you want Yahoo, get Yahoo. Or do what some people do. Get your own mail server if you're running your own server and just do it that way. That's another way to do it. If you happen to run your own website, if you have the funds to do it, but if you're poor like me, you get the one you like. Well, I'm just use Gmail. So that's that story. For 2005 and 6, I get introduced to Skype, and after writing on a forum, a guy says, "Hey, I want you to get on Skype, and I want you to add me." Now, I got to tell you guys this. This is funny. I had a Pentium 2 computer. Now, understand the era we're talking about, 2005. Right. Think about the processors that were out in 2005. We're talking about processors. Everybody had mostly Pentium 4 processors. Some of them actually had even Pentium, they even had Pentium, Intel Celerons at the time that were slower than molasses in February or January. Depends on where you are and who you're from. Wait, whoops. Freudian slip. You get the reference. But here I am, this little rinky-dinky computer, Pentium 2, 350 megahertz and 128 megs of RAM. Notice I emphasize megs. People I had machines with at least 2 gigs of RAM in it by this point. So they're way ahead of the game. And here I am with a slow computer thinking, all right, Skype should run beautifully on here. Ho, 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 was I sorely mistaken. I get in Skype calls, and they sounded like phone calls. They sounded like everybody was talking on their gums and not on their teeth, because, of course, 8K sounds like that when you speak on a telephone. And, many people gave me, shall I say, 50 Shades of Hell for that. I'm glad that's not a book. If it is, I'm literally gonna run for the hills. Not literally, but I'm gonna laugh my head off. That's what I'm gonna do. 50 Shades of Hell. Watch someone look that up after they hear this podcast and write one of us, Aaron, and go, by the way, I found that book. It's called 50 Shades of Hell. I might have found it in the Boondocks somewhere, you know? It'll be one of those types of things. But quite frankly, as I'm meeting these people, and, I'm nervous, mind you, because I just got out of my dad, so I don't, I made the big mistake that a 18, 19, 20-year-old makes. Opened up to people before I really knew who they were. Now, I want to point out, if you're somebody that has gone through trauma, I want to warn you about something. Do not ever, as I learned then, a lesson I learned is don't ever, ever try to turn around and put your story out to people you don't know directly. And I'm not talking indirect. If you do it on a podcast like we're doing, that seems to have a different effect than if you are like, you go to that person and suddenly you're telling them, I just came out of abuse in the hands of my dad, so this is triggering. And then you get this. Well, if you're that easily triggered, I want you to turn off your computer. One day I said, hey, how do you, and this is how weird some of these people were. Hey, I have a problem with this issue on my computer and I can't seem to fix the lag. Now, the guy, I had to laugh at him a little bit because I thought it was kind of hilarious because I wanted to do what he suggested. He goes, well, just hold down the power button on your computer and turn it off. That'll take care of it. I knew what he really meant, but I laughed anyway because I'm like, hey, this computer bothers me enough. I really kind of want to turn it off. The state of Nebraska saved me, though, finally in 2007. They gave me a Pentium 4, 1.4 gigahertz, and 512 megs of RAM. Of course, they couldn't give me a gig of RAM. Why? Because it was just a little too hard to do. You know how it is. State-funded computers at that time were kind of a little less, and they were a little subpar. They weren't exactly your best, but hey, they got you by. And I didn't complain. See, we lived, me and my mom and my family, just for everybody's knowledge here, we didn't live a rich life. It may have looked like it the amount of times we moved, but really a lot of that came from saving, and a lot of that came from paying bills, being responsible, and knowing how to budget, and learning that budgeting concept, and then going to stores and learning how to shop. Mom taught me how to ask for assistant shoppers, taught me how to pass a card up to the register. She's like, I want you're going to hand my card to the cashier, and you're going to hand the card over. They're going to run it. Of course, I'll tell them the PIN because it was her card, of course. So she goes, but you're going to hand them the card, and you're going to let them run it. Then you're going to hand it, and I'm going to show you how to do this, this. Mom didn't let me just sit down and just not do anything. Mm-hmm. My mom was if you're going to learn to be in this world independent, I don't give a damn if somebody tells you can't do it. I know you. I'm the one that brought you into this world, and you're more capable than people think you are. She used to get after a lot of my other family members because, see, to be honest with you, a lot of them had the mentality, well, he's blind, somebody has to take care of him. And they used the autism, the ADHD, and the sensory processing disorders, the millions of other issues as reasons. Now, mind you, I mentioned sensory processing disorder. I should make a distinction for those who are younger, who are maybe listening to this, who were born at a time that perhaps you may be going, what? That is a thing. In about 2012, a lot of the neuropsychologists really started to dive into what the sensory responses are, and that's how they became acquainted with sensory processing disorders, which basically refers to one's inability to process sensory and in certain ways, and thus accommodations now are made to accommodate for those who need it. Well, if you guys want to know a little more about that, again, we'll dive into that more deeper. That's probably going to be a deeper subject for offline communication. Not that I don't want to talk about it on here, but I feel like if I did that, we'd have to split this podcast into about 25 parts because there's so many things that would we'd have to cover. And for those who are maybe not as, and I love to educate people. So I want to really encourage you. Again, I'm going to be providing you my contact at the end of this. I actually have Telegram too. And so you guys can contact me there. I have Discord. And so we're going to talk about those at the end of the podcast. So as I've mentioned, we're in 2007. I've gotten a new machine. Still dealing with the bullies, but still pressing on. Because why? Brandon Hennis doesn't have a give up button. I'm still trying to figure out how in the world I've managed not to have one after 22 years of dealing with bullying, even on Yahoo groups and other places. But I guess maybe it's because you just can't shut me down that quick. Or maybe it's just because I love myself too much. And I mean love myself. You have to love yourself to love other people. All right? Maybe it's just because I believe that I don't need to let others win that are trying to bring me down. Instead, I need to be victorious by believing in myself and not listening to the naysayers. Because, all they're doing is just encouraging you to press on. By them saying you can't, it just gives you more of an inspiration to say you can. That's really all they're doing. They're just trying to tell you you can't do it. Because they don't believe you're capable, even though you've shown time and again that you can. And so once I got to the computers, I actually started working on writing auto hotkey programming scripts like dialog message boxes to test how screen readers read dialog boxes. Now, understand that early on in the podcast, if you fast forward through my diatribe earlier about my school and me bragging on my computer teacher about his ability to teach me computers, you'll know that this part here is critical. I was big into how do I make an app work better with a screen reader? Because while I wrote developers, I found developers at that time, and they still, some developers today still struggle with this. When we write developers, and this is a challenge, I'm sure many of your other guests have talked about this, about developers who, in their line of experience, when you write and tell them an application is not accessible, whether it's a renter's app, whether it's a website where you're going and filling out a form, but there's no alt tags on the text or something like that, that someone has probably encountered this. You go and tell the developers, this is inaccessible, I'm having trouble. Okay, we will contact our web development team and we'll get this fixed. But, guess what they don't do? Guess what still stays? Just as it is. And that's part of the struggles I went through over time. So I thought, if I could dive into the meat of what the screen reader is doing, then I could sort of figure out what to do about this problem myself. If they're not going to do it, I don't have enough tools in front of me to be able to hold them as accountable as I'd like, and I'm not rich, I can't call a lawyer, but I have a better idea. What if I could write something? So I started with JAWS frames. I don't do JAWS scripting. Okay, we have plenty of those out there. I'm unfortunately not one of them, but I do know how to do JAWS frames. So I started figuring out how to train JAWS to put frames around it and announce certain pieces of information so I knew when to interact with the JAWS cursor and where to plant the JAWS cursor when I needed to. One such example is the DECtalk text editor, which I can use with NVDA with no problem. Although I'll mention I am partially responsible for beta testing an app that a gentleman out of California made called DTPad, which allows one to use DECtalk in various DLL files, and we have a Speak Windows folder where you can test out varying degrees of DECtalk versions all in one go from the same app rather than loading up the DECtalk Speak Windows, and there's keystrokes galore with it. A long story with DECtalk, one of my favorite synths, by the way. alongside Mac and Talk for you Mac fans. Probably because Fred reminds me of Deck Talk. I don't know. Fred kind of has that same sound. If you listen to him and then you listen to Paul with Deck Talk, there's similarities. And I actually think, and I may be wrong, Aaron, I wonder if you knew this, but can you guess where Dennis Klatt, where the accent that Deck Talk uses, can you guess what state that is from? Let's pick your brain a little bit.
Probably a Midwestern state.
Nope. I'll give you a couple of
Texas.
ideas on the East Coast. So we're going to stay east, but we're going to stay in New England.
Oh, probably New Hampshire or Vermont.
Okay, you were close. I'm going to go ahead and give you this one. It's Massachusetts.
Really?
Dennis Klatt, MIT in Massachusetts. So
okay,
if you listen to the accent, and I don't know why my phone thinks it needs to talk tonight. Apparently my Pixel 8a is trying to have a say in the conversation. Shut up, Pixel. We don't need your input. Anyway, all right. So the correct answer would have been out of Boston. And if you listen to Deck Talk, it actually does have a bit of a Boston accent. For example, when it says talk, it says talk, dot, kind of like they do in Boston. It doesn't have, it says car, kind of like car talk. Anybody ever listen to car talk? With Ray Mariazzi?
Never listened.
Tapper Brothers?
Never listened to it, but I've heard of the show. I've heard of it. But
okay.
Yeah.
You're missing out. They are hilarious. Unfortunately, one of the brothers passed, but they have archives of the show, and it's hilarious. Not because they're talking about the cars. Listen, the car part, I still don't understand automobiles enough to listen to it all the time, but I don't listen to it so much for that purpose, but because they're so witty, and you can listen. If you can listen to that show without laughing, you have a very dry sense of humor. I'm kidding. I joke. I kid. There's not a dry eye listening to that one. Anyway, so, 2007, I get the faster computer. 2010, I'm going to jump a few years here. Before I do, because the question will come up, you said you met your girlfriend in 2004, 4 on Yahoo Messenger. Okay. Let me correct something. We didn't date until 2020. All right? So just for your information, but we knew each other long before we dated. And we all had to go through our high roads and low roads. So for anybody who's wondering, we've been together since 2020, Jess and I. And why is that important? Because I just know some of the questions I've gotten over the years whenever I talk about that, and people are like, so now my curiosity's perked, and I'm like, all right, cool. Let me go ahead and squash this before it perks their curiosity, because I love that they're curious, so I'll answer it ahead of time. I'm ahead. I try to be ahead of the game. Except in baseball, you're not really supposed to be that far ahead because you don't know what the pitcher is going to throw at you. So as that were. 2010 is when I got my first cell phone. At this point, I'm age 23, turning 24, and I get my first cell phone. Everybody at this point had cell phones for quite a while. The LG 8300. Who remembers those LG phones? Those LG 8300s.
That was my first phone. My first phone was
really
LG. Yeah.
Verizon Wireless. Remember that lady? You always turn it on. Verizon Wireless, and then you dialing the number.
Remember is your call cannot be completed as dialed. Please check the number and call again.
We're sorry. You have reached a number that has been disconnected or is no longer in service. Oh yes.
Oh yeah.
And of course on the landlines, we all remember the infamous 60 cycle hum with that kind of almost C natural subharmonic, which usually meant that the carbons on the line were going bad. Yes, because people still used a lot of landlines then, still along with their cell phones. Anymore now, it's cell phones. Why don't they just make them use Meets or Zoom anymore? Hey, we would love to have you call in by phone, but we'll hear you better if you use Meet. Okay? No, I'm kidding. You know as well as I do. Most professional radio stations are probably sitting here laughing at me now going, why would we do that when we're on iHeart and we can have a talkback option? But Hey, that's all right. So 2010, I get my first cell phone. It's a Samsung Haven. And I was having a good time with that phone when I got it. And quite frankly, it was, the first ever accessible cell phone. And I felt like I was on top of the world, even though it wasn't a smartphone. And everybody's sitting there with their smartphones, their touch screens, and I'm sitting here with a dial pad. Now, you have to remember, for some stupid reason, I kept following this mentality that, okay, it's not a good thing to have a touch screen. You got to have the buttons, because what happens if the touch screen goes bad, and all this and this and this, because all the negative talk everybody was giving about the touch screen phones, like the that they couldn't really use them all that well and everything. And of course, at the time, BlackBerry had a screen reader, but it wasn't all that popular. You had iPhone was starting to come out. Well, I didn't get my first iPhone until 2011. I say starting to come out. They had iPhones, but VoiceOver was not popularly noticed for a little bit.
It wasn't nearly as versatile as it is now.
No.
Certainly not.
I mean, there were people who did podcasts on them. I mean, immaculate podcasts. I think back to the days of Blind Cool Tech. That was one of my favorite podcasts back in the day.
Who hosted
to just get on and look at Larry Skukon.
Never spoken to him yet, but yeah.
Oh, you listen. I think that should be a subject. That should be a 2-person interview, because I'm talking about starting a new podcast called Brandon in the Light, which is something we're going to talk about here in a little bit. And I think that'd be kind of cool to do a dual podcast together, and we could interview Larry Skukon about BCT. I don't know. That'd be kind of a cool idea.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know why because the guy would record his podcast on walks. I mean, he would go from business to business, and you could hear the lights as he's passing. I mean, the stereo rotation.
That's so cool.
Digital recorders. And it's like, this guy's walking.
That's great.
He sees nothing at all.
Life. Yeah.
And he takes you into his life, and he's talking about his opinion about Google changing something, or he's giving his opinion about, for example.
Funny you mention it, and then you should pivot to the next marble that you lost.
How many marbles can I lose? 1,000? Go ahead.
I've never, I mean, it's a very creative idea. I've never actually done, I've never done an interview where me and somebody else interviews. So I've never done a 3-way podcast where 3 podcasts meet on one podcast. I'll tell you why I've never done it and why I would do it. I've never done it. And I would rarely, as you go through the archive of Aaron's Opinion, as you delve into the history over the years, you'll notice that most of the content on the YouTube or on Apple is just me talking to guests one-on-one. Very rarely is it. Now, there's been a couple times where I've had 2 people on all at the same time, but I will tell you, as you know, with your audio knowledge, the more people you have on a conversation, then it starts to get a little confusing. It starts to get a little dizzy.
It's a little lopsided.
It gets a little dizzy for the listener. And then, so you have to be careful with that. Now, you gave me an interesting idea, that could be something that the 2 of us could work on, is maybe getting in touch with some of these people that would be great guests for both of our shows. And then you and I kind of come on here once in a while and do a 3-way interview where we'll just say, well, this kind of counts for all 3 of our podcasts. We'll just have a great talk,
Oh, yeah. And of course, Blind Cool Tech is no more. And it left the scene after a while. Funny you should mention that. I should give a shout. I need to, besides my girlfriend, Jessica, and besides a very dear sister of mine, and I don't mean sister by blood, but that lives with me, Haley, who's somewhere hiding. I don't know what she's doing. But I also want to give a shout to Nesma. You guys, I think you've had Nesma on your podcast
years ago, and I have a confession.
Years ago,
I have a confession to make, and I'm an honest podcaster. She was on the show so long ago that I don't quite remember the conversation well, which is why in the future...
She thinks it might have been TBA Net, the discussion about TBA Net, the Blind Advocacy Network that was run by a mutual friend of ours.
Very well could be. So I think that's exactly why in the weeks to come, and we'll have to talk off air, but in the weeks to come, she needs to come back to the show, certainly, and she's so welcome here. But
Oh yeah,
that's
Nesma
one
is
of
an
the
amazing person.
well, I don't know. Yes, she is, and quite frankly, so are you. Your attitude is impressive.
Thank you.
You have a very
Thank you.
impressive and a very admirable, learnable attitude that can be applied in people's learning. So
Hmm.
anyway, though, yes, we'll definitely get some special episodes planned in the future for sure. That's a really cool idea. The thing with a three-way conversation is it has to sound and it kind of has to be just right. If you're going to get three people on, though, it has
Hmm.
to be kind of just right. That's kind of the problem with that. So we'll definitely work towards that and get in touch with some of these people. And you'd be surprised. I've talked to people, Brandon. I'll tell you, I've had episodes here where somebody said, Aaron, I used to be a podcaster, but I don't know if I should get back into it. And by the end of our conversation, they're like, yeah, Aaron, I'm definitely getting back into podcasting. So let's see if we can get somebody else back into podcasting. That would be so cool to get a former podcaster back into the circuit of the podcast. Absolutely. But certainly, though, why don't you continue, well, with all this victorious
Hmm.
marbles and just keep telling the life story here. Absolutely. Hmm.
All right. And so we mentioned the cell phones. Now, this is funny. The first ever smartphone that I get wasn't a phone with phone service. It was a iPhone 3GS. And it was just a play with phone. Really, that's all it was, because I still had the Haven. That was the first time I got it. That was 2011. Well, I decided that I liked it so much that I wanted an iPhone as a primary, because the Motorola Citrus that I'd had before it was simply blah. I couldn't use it for nothing. There was no trackball. There was no other cool. There was no cool functionality. There's Haley. Hi, Haley. Haley's behind me, and I gave a shout to you, so you know. Haley uh, has been instrumental. We'll get to her in a minute, because she's been very, very much an inspiration to all of us here. But here's the thing with the iPhones is I had a Motorola Citrus. Now, to explain for those who don't know, back then Android was at 2.3 gingerbread. However, I did not. However, the Citrus, however, was not on gingerbread. It was on Froyo, which was Android 2.2. And unfortunately, the accessibility of that was a little bit difficult to come by, since you didn't have a trackball and you couldn't double tap on stuff without enabling a secondary readout service that was built into the Motorola. You had to tie it in with talkbacks. You had to kind of get that touch to tap twice tapping to execute. You had to work pretty hard to get what you wanted. And one thing that I loved when I got the iPhone was just the seamless use of apps. Now, we were still on iOS 4.3.5 back then. So iPhone really was kind of my go-to. Android at that time wasn't what it is today. It really wasn't as developed, in my opinion. I didn't feel like that as a productivity user, um, I didn't feel like productivity-wise, like I really had a shot at being productive with it. Um, so here's the deal. When I got the iPhone, um, I had to hit the I'm taking a drink button for a second. That's why my voice went silent. Um, I get the iPhone, and as I got a hold of that, the next phone in my arsenal started being newer Android phones as Android Jelly Bean came out. I start with an iPhone 4, and I had an iPhone 4 up until 2013 when I decided to give Android Jelly Bean a try with a Motorola Droid Ultra. Now, by the way, this was a great little phone. Droid. Now, a former friend of mine was responsible for giving me an LG Enlighten before, and I did use it as a primary phone a couple of times, but there were some apps that it just didn't do very well. And its space limitation. Listen, when an 8 gig iPhone can outdo a 1 gig LG, anybody's going to be a happy camper. So iPhone 4 was the phone for a while. Then I went to a Droid Ultra in 2013 to be succeeded at the end of 2013 into 14 by a iPhone 5C. Now, I'm bringing up the phones because the events during this time really weren't all that eventful. I left, the only thing that was eventful is my move to eastern Nebraska that happened due to the fact that my mom's health had begun to deteriorate after hitting a deer, and she broke her vertebrae in her back. So we had to move to eastern Nebraska, but then our permanent move to Missouri Valley occurred in July of 2014. Missouri Valley is a little town, for curiosity's sake, outside of Omaha, Nebraska, due north and a little east, about 30 minutes. So I'm a little outside of Omaha so literally I can take runs to Omaha and go to grocery store if I really want to.
Sure.
And I mention that because I am 10 minutes away from a town that made national news in 2014 for the infamous hailstorm that nearly took out about half the town. That's Blair, Nebraska, which, if anybody remembers watching the news and seeing the stories about the baseball-sized hail, yeah.
I didn't specifically remember, but now that you mentioned it, I do bring it up. Brandon,
I hope you don't get that kind of hail where you are.
Well, we'll get to that. But what I wanted to say to you is that you've done such a magnificent job with part 1 of our conversation here on Aaron's Opinion that I must confess that I am starting to run out of time for part 1. We certainly need a part 2 and probably a part 3 with you. But
indeed.
But there are many reasons why I'm saying it in this way and in this moment. But I would like to say that Brandon will be back for certainly part 2 to tell the rest of the story soon. But until then, and we'll certainly.
If I may, before we wrap up, let me give a quick bit of contact information for people if you would like to get with me on what you heard on part 1.
Absolutely.
If you guys would like a little more insight into part 1 of this podcast from my perspective, if you would like to reach out to me, my Telegram is Chinmouth86, CHINMOUTH 86. It's a silly Telegram name, but hey, who cares? My email, kc0usm@gmail.com. That's kc0usm, utterly silly man, @gmail.com. And of course, my Discord, because I'm part of an anti-bullying movement, is Webbo, WEBBO, roll, ROLE, Londini, LONDINI. That also follows the same moniker as TikTok, and you can find me there as well. And I'm also on Facebook under the name Brandon Hennis. And if you would note that there are 2 Facebooks of mine, look for the Facebook that is dated, who has post dated 2025, and then you will find me. So if you have any questions, those are how you reach me. And that was part 1 from this angle. Back to Aaron.
Well, why, thank you. Absolutely. So certainly, though, before we get going, I'm sure that you have some questions for this Aaron Richmond guy, Aaron's Opinion, So as I like to say, and trust me, you aren't getting out of this by saying, I don't know. That answer is not going to suffice.
I don't know. It's not an answer.
You're a character. Boy,
Well, if I'm a character, what movie?
Life. Starring God.
Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. All right, I'm done.
You're a blast, man. We just love you on this show, but you're going to be one of our characters here at the movie that you're in. It's called Life, starring Life, written by God. Props use the universe, marbles, and Brandon.
Marbles and happy. If you have a problem with lost marbles, call 1-800-MARBLE-5. Your marbles are important to you and to us as well. If you've lost them and you are having any technical issues, we would advise you to not press the off button on your microphone. Damage may ensue at the process. Each sold separately, power companies not included.
And don't forget. And by the way, if we can ever get our guests to stop laughing and having way too much fun, don't forget the views expressed on this podcast are not always the opinion of the host, but they are almost always the opinion of the guests or things like that. So if you can ask me now only one question to really make me sweat, to see if I'm worth my salt as a podcaster, what do you really want to know about Aaron Richmond or Aaron's opinion? One more question, and then we'll wrap up part one.
If you could do anything in terms of your podcast, would you ever want your podcast to be a syndicated radio show at some point where you could actually have live guest interactions so that if anybody had questions, they could ask them live on air? And if so, why? And if not, why?
Well, we've kind of done it. In some cases, now that I know that you're this much of a blast, in some cases, what I've done is I've actually shared the Zoom link publicly, and then the public can come into the Zoom room and sit muted in the audience. So I do know how to do that, and I've done that in the past. It just depends on what mood I'm in and if I feel like doing that, and how well I know the guests. I understand, and I'm sure you do, that I didn't really know you before now. So I wasn't sure, how well things would or would not go. But now that we know how things are going to go, we'll certainly do that for part two, and we'll definitely get people to come in and ask you some questions.
Well, you got a sneak preview of me, actually, to be fair, through a former guest of yours who may be a return guest of yours when I spoke on her Facebook Messenger. So you kind of got an early introduction to me that was not exactly the easiest introduction, for those who are curious.
Indeed, but we spoke with Nesma many years back, you see. So we
many decades ago in a galaxy far, far away.
But we will certainly include more audience interaction.
Indeed.
And absolutely. And we'll certainly keep in touch in that way, and we'll definitely figure out how we're going to get you on here for part two, because you've got a lot more to share, and we didn't even finish the half of it.
We haven't even scratched the surface, I'm telling you.
So part two, we'll pick up where we left off, and then we'll get up to where we are today, and then probably by part three, we'll kind of sum it all up so that people truly know who Brandon Hennis truly is inside of it.
Indeed.
All right.
And at least, and then you will hear, in the words of the late Paul Harvey, the rest of the story.
There you go. Absolutely. And until next time, and until part two with Brandon Hennis, don't forget, he's Brandon Hennis. I'm Aaron's Opinion. And until next time, help one person today, help 1 million people tomorrow.